The Korean Peninsula remains a puzzle after years of strategic patience, sanctions, and negotiations, and proposed double suspension. Have they left no stone left? A frank one-on-one interview with former U.S. Assistant Secretary of State Daniel Russel right after this break. Welcome back. You're watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei, on CGTN. The DPRK's most recent test of an intercontinental ballistic missile suggests sanctions and warnings of military action have done little to deter Pyongyang. What will likely happen next? Take a look at this first.
United in its condemnation of the DPRK's latest missile launch, the international community, however, is sharply divided on what the response should be. Russia is openly questioning U.S. motives after Washington's United Nations ambassador Nikki Haley talked of war and destroying the government of the DPRK.
One gets the impression that everything has been done on purpose to make Kim Jong-un snap and carry out further inadvisable actions. It is regrettable. The Americans should explain to us what they're after.
The U.S. also wants Moscow and Beijing to consider an oil embargo against Pyongyang.
I think the Chinese are doing a lot. We do think they could do more with the oil, and we're really asking them to please restrain more of the oil, not cut it off completely. That was the most effective tool the last time the North Koreans came to the table, was cutting the oil off.
China has condemned the latest missile launch and supports tougher UN sanctions, but it also wants a pathway to talks, not just more sanctions, which could raise tensions further.
China will fully, accurately, earnestly and faithfully implement the resolutions and fulfill its international obligations. We will continue to handle the relevant issues in a way that helps to realize the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, advance dialogue and negotiations, and safeguard regional peace and stability.
Now, things are getting ever more urgent and complicated, but the burning question is, what's next? Can all parties, or at least most of the parties concerned, come to any kind of consensus? Why our previous interactions or lack of previous interactions with Pyongyang failed? Daniel Russel is the former Assistant Secretary of State for East Asia and Pacific Affairs during the Obama administration. It's believed that he played an important role in pushing forward the U.S. policy of so-called rebalance in Asia, and was also an insider of the Obama administration's policy of so-called strategic patience toward Pyongyang, which many believe meant doing nothing policy on the DPRK nuclear issue. I asked him directly about that policy failures in an earlier interview. In fact, Mr. Russell now is serving as a diplomat in residence at Asia Society Policy Institute in New York. Let's listen in. Secretary Russell, welcome to CGTN.
Thank you, Wei. I'm glad to be here.
A lot of things going on the Korean Peninsula recently. One of the things is where we are heading for. Some say the strategic patience by the Obama administration wasted 8 years. You were there.
Yes.
What happened?
Strategic patience really was a way of describing the determination on the part of the United States not to fall into the trap that the North Koreans were setting for the world of accepting the inevitability of a nuclear North Korea. The U.S. under Obama repeatedly made diplomatic efforts and outreach to North Korea. North Korea's strategy, though, was to walk out of the six-party talks.
What's the outreach? What's the outreach? Name them. Exactly what did by the United States over the 8 years?
I traveled to North Korea along with my colleagues, led by the late Ambassador Steve Bosworth. We met with North Korea repeatedly. Bill Clinton, the former President of the United States, went to Pyongyang and met with Kim Jong-il.
With an attitude, the North Korean was arguing, coming from the United States, not necessarily sincerity.
If North Korea will abide by its commitments and adhere to international law, the U.S. is willing to help by providing economic assistance, diplomatic recognition, and to enter into talks with the relevant parties to replace the armistice with a peace treaty.
Secretary Russell, you know better than anybody else, that means precondition. And how could a dialogue and negotiation happen with strong preconditions coming from one party?
There has to be a sustainable basis for dialogue, and that's something that China and the United States agree on. North Korea right now would be happy to have a dialogue about what the United States alone could do, what China alone could do, but the critical part of negotiations has to be North Korea coming into compliance with international law. The goal of the six-party talks, which were chaired by China, was the complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula.
China has proposed double suspension so far. During the Obama administration and later during the Trump administration, until now, that has not been adopted or even seriously considered.
The problem, in my view, with the double freeze suggestion is that it suggests that the United States...
Double suspension strategy, now it's called.
Okay, well, thanks for that update. But the point is that one set of actions, North Korea's pursuit of nuclear weapons and missiles, is illegal under international law. The other set of activities, defense exercises, is something that China does, South Korea, the US, Japan, Russia, and even North Korea. There's no law against defense exercises.
But not when it is targeting at the other party.
All defense exercises, by definition, are aimed at preventing and protecting against an attack by the other side.
You know what is the difference between principle and reality. So the reality is the DPRK has ICBM, and it could have the range of reaching the capital city of the United States. The reality is you do not know yet how sophisticated the nuclear warhead that DPRK has already developed. You do not know whether they would have the launching vehicles already ready to carry and protect those warheads yet. But they have already suggested by their president saying the complete nuclear regime is ready. So that is the reality. Facing that reality, what will be the solution? Or there's no solution, just let things go.
Well, in your list of realities, it's important to include the strong deterrent capacity of the United States and its allies. It's important to include the strong defense capabilities of the United States. But most importantly, it's necessary to recognize the determination, not just of the United States, South Korea, and Japan, but also of China to do two things. One, to prevent war breaking out on the Korean Peninsula.
How could China do that?
Well, I'm talking about our determination.
All right.
And I'll come back to your question. But the second reality is the insistence on the part of the U.S., China, and the international community that North Korea will not be accepted as a nuclear state.
Chinese Ambassador Cui Tiankai already said it very clearly that China is not accepting North Korea as a nuclear state. That has been very clear from the Chinese side. The second point now has been solved. What about the first point? And the question, how should we face this reality, Secretary Russel?
Yeah. I believe, May, that there's no solution to the threat from North Korea, no peaceful solution that doesn't begin with real cooperation between the United States and China. It is critically important that we develop a common understanding of what it is that we are trying to build in Northeast Asia, of how we can focus the efforts not only of our two countries, but of our partners in Seoul, our partners in Tokyo, and in Moscow, on a collective effort to convince Kim Jong-un that he is going the wrong way down a one-way street.
That wish is certainly nice, and yet how to achieve that, this is what we are lacking right now, a roadmap to reach the pragmatic goal, Secretary Russell?
Well, the roadmap that the U.S. and China are pursuing is a dual track strategy of sanctions and pressure on the one hand, and keeping the door open to diplomatic negotiations on the other.
That has already been done a lot. The UN Security Council adopted a resolution several times about sanctions against the DPRK. Leaders in the United States, South Korea, Japan, China, of course, have been talking on the international basis about against any new development. China Foreign Ministry even expressed about deep concern and deep opposition over the recent launch of the ICBM from the DPRK side. So what else can be done?
I think everyone, including the President of the United States, wants a peaceful resolution of the threat from North Korea. Look, in geostrategic problems or in, say, medical problems, not one shot, one pill is necessarily going to provide the antidote, to provide the cure. In some cases, it has to be a sustained regimen over time that's going to have the desired effect.
The time is the issue. Secretary Russell, you know better than I do. The time means new technologies for the DPRK. Time means there could be new possibility of crisis even among other members of this community that we talk about that could cooperate with one another on the DPRK issue. So time is precious. How can we have a more timely, efficient measures to make things happen? Is negotiation still on the table? Is it still going to be with so many preconditions? Could it catering to the DPRK's rhetoric, at least, that they are only going to go ahead with their nuclear program only because they want a security guarantee? Why can't you, the United States, and South Korea together, be able to provide a security guarantee? After all, the peace treaty is not signed.
Well, you make the point that there is the real pressure of time. And what the logical conclusion from that point is that China, as well as the U.S. and others, need to do more to apply pressure to achieve the desired effect. Now, you asked about security guarantees. The fact of the matter is that under the six-party talks process, as well as on a unilateral basis, the United States, including at the level of past presidents, have made what we call negative security assurances. Assurances that the United States has no hostile intent, has no plans to attack or no desire to attack North Korea. But there is no likelihood that North Korean leaders are going to simply take an oral assurance.
So peace treaty not possible. Something written on the paper.
I don't think that a piece of paper is what's needed, but the United States has already agreed that in the course of a comprehensive solution, we would be perfectly prepared to negotiate a peace arrangement, a peace treaty to replace the armistice. We're in favor of that, but not instead of denuclearization.
But you know, Secretary Russell, an elephant in the room we haven't talked about. That is, what about the trust among those countries that you just mentioned, between China and the United States, between China and some of the other players in the Northeast Asia? Earlier, when you were serving in the Obama administration, the policy of so-called rebalance in Asia was very controversial in this part of the world, particularly to many Chinese. Chinese were saying or thinking whether the United States want to isolate China from all the other players in the region. So with that kind of lack of trust to begin with, a lack of fabric of working together to begin with, can this issue that you talk about on the DPRK be able to be pushed forward for a solution, Secretary Russell?
Well, I'm proud of the progress that was made in U.S.-China relations over the 8 years of the Obama administration when I had a role in our Asia policy. I was involved with President Obama, Vice President Biden, then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, and John Kerry in any number of important dialogues with the Chinese government. And I feel that we have put a very solid foundation under U.S.-China relations. And that's reflected in the steady increase of practical cooperation. At the same time, I'm very troubled by the strains in Beijing's relationship with its neighbors, with South Korea in the first instance, and with Japan as well. Now, the good news is that the president of South Korea is expected to visit China. The good news is that President Xi and Premier Li have met with the Japanese Prime Minister in recent multilateral events. I think that building trust between China and its neighbors should be a top priority.
What will be the role, many wonder, of the United States in the region?
Yeah, I wonder if that's really the question, because the role of the...
That is the question.
Well, the role of the United States is pretty well established, and over the course of 6 or more decades after World War II, the United States has helped to build a stable, steady, rules-based order and an open economy, and it's well understood, including by Chinese leaders,
that China have changed. You have a rising country called China, 1.4 billion. Some consider China as a threat, even though China has no intention, as the Chinese government said, to violate or try to, in a way, disrupt any previous order.
So I think you're asking now the right question, which is, how will the rise of China affect the world and the region? And how that depends on the answer to the question, how will a stronger, wealthier China behave?
And also how others would perceive China, and that reflected upon China about how it would interact with the others too.
Well, you know the old saying about the chicken and the egg. But yes, I think that how China behaves shapes how China is regarded, and international expectations for China, I hope, will shape China's behavior over time. Now, coming out of the 19th Party Congress, President Xi Jinping has made, I think, very ambitious statements, not only about what China itself will become in terms of the twin centennial goals, but also about how the Chinese role and the Chinese model, shall we say, will influence international developments. Those are ambitious goals. International expectations are high, and it's certainly my hope that China will meet those expectations, will live up to them, and will win the trust and the support of the countries, first of all in your neighborhood, and second in the international community.
Secretary Daniel Russel,
yes,
former Secretary of State for East Asia, thank you so much, sir, for joining us.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to find us World Insight CGTN into your search engine, or check out our YouTube channel. You can also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Weibo. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on the World Insight team, thanks for watching. Tune in again next time for insight across China and around the world. Good night.